Hey lads, welcome back to Theory Thursdays. This is week 3 of studying the techniques of positional play from Bronznik and Terekhin. And today we're on the second topic of the first chapter. The first topic was restricting the knight. And we had 2 videos on restricting the knight. Check them out in the playlist if you haven't seen them already. Today's topic is on restricting the bishop. And the first way we're going to be doing that is with these pawns on the square f3 and e4. And for black, the squares f6 and e5. Understanding these sort of setups in games where you can put the pawns on those squares is going to be extremely helpful because it just makes your opponent's bishop such a weak piece. So do stick around through the whole video. I decided to take the 4 best examples from the book. In the book, there's 9 different examples with annotation and all kinds of stuff. But I've only picked 4 of them, and I thought they were the 4 most helpful. And hopefully you'll see how professional players have put this into effect in their games and how it's actually quite simple to put into effect in your game. The first example is going to be between 2 players, Flohr and Makogonov. So let's jump right into it. I often find it a wee bit frustrating when I look at positions in chess books. I don't know how it got to that position. So what I'm going to do is just make all the moves of the actual game between Flohr and Makogonov, and you'll be able to see what they played, what opening they got to get to the position that we're going to study. So white played d4, black played knight f6, c4, e6, g3, d5, bishop to g2, finkered on that long diagonal, c6, and this is the Slav defense, the triangle Slav. So if any of you play the triangle Slav as black, maybe you'll know these positions, and this will be helpful to see. Knight d2, knight bd7, knight gf3, bishop e7, castle, castle, b3, b6, bishop b2, bishop b7, getting both of those bishops finkered on that long diagonal, although black's bishop does not look as powerful, but that's going to change in a minute. Queen c2, c5, starting to get that bishop into a more powerful position where there's no pawns in front of it. Rook a c1, rook c8, queen b1, rook c7, rook fd1, d takes c4, knight takes c4, b5, kicking that knight, knight e3, bishop e4, tempoing the queen, queen a1, queen to c8, d takes c5, bishop takes c5, knight d4, jumping into the middle of the board, bishop takes g2. It's a finkered bishop, so it's always good to swap off a finkered bishop if you can, because it's very powerful where it's sitting. Knight takes g2, queen b7, knight e1. And now we're into the position that I saw when I opened the chess book. So, what would you play as black in this position? Maybe you guys are looking at this position and you're thinking, oh, I don't have a clue what I would play. Well, let's have a look and see what are white's most powerful pieces. When I look at this position, I see the queen on a1 and the bishop on b2. And these pieces are looking down this long diagonal. They're very powerful, especially together. And they're looking at g7. So what black starts to think is, how can I make these pieces not powerful? Especially the bishop, because the queen can always sidestep and then look down this diagonal. But how can we make this bishop specifically less powerful? Well, one way we can do that is with a pawn barrier, getting pawns on f6 and e5. And so this is the move that Makogonov plays, e5. It's the best move in the position. Now you're thinking probably, well, hold up, maybe the knight can jump here and attack this pawn, and then it's attacking it here, and it's also attacking it here, potentially. Or maybe you think, oh, what if the knight just jumps here, and we've got 2 pieces attacking the pawn, and this looks quite interesting. So there's a couple moves you have to consider that white could do. Well, let's have a quick look and see what would happen if white jumped the knight to f5. Well, the queen can play queen to e4, tempoing the pawn and the knight. It's a fork. But here, white's actually got a very tricky way to get out of this, and only one way to not fall into a losing position completely. They can play knight e7 check, attacking the king. And you're like, hold up, maybe the black bishop can eat us. Well, the black bishop can't eat us, because if the black bishop were to do something so stupid, the rook can eat the rook. And so you've just sacked the exchange for nothing. Black got a wonderful knight, but white got a wonderful rook. And we all know a rook is worth 5 and a knight is worth 3. So white's clearly winning this position. Black's not going to take that knight. He's just going to sidestep. And as soon as he sidesteps, you can see the advantage here. The game's completely equal, and white thought, I really don't want to have a completely equal position. He can't win this pawn here. He's only got 2 attackers on it, and there's 2 defenders. And he's looking in a wee bit of danger here. There's some pieces that might be able to start attacking him. So instead of playing his knight to f5, he played the more logical move, knight d to f3. And now he has 3 attackers on this pawn. But Makogonov isn't going to defend this pawn. He's going to go for a counterattack. So he puts his knight on e4. He's got 2 pieces looking at this square, and he's got some very scary threats. If white were to be so stupid and take this pawn, then black is in just a completely winning position. Let's have a look if he takes with knight. If he takes with knight, black can take the pawn here, tempoing the rook. And as soon as the rook moves, anywhere the knight moves is going to be check. So it's going to be very dangerous. The best move here for white is to play knight to f3. And here you just get a rook for free because you're checking with the bishop. And so you can't actually capture this knight. The knight's going to escape on the next move. So that's what would happen if white took the pawn with the knight. You say, oh, maybe white can take the pawn with the bishop. That's a blunder too. We just recapture, queen recaptures. And here we go for this beautiful attack again. Knight takes f2. The king can't capture because we're protected. And here maybe the rook has to sack the exchange. Or we just trade here. The queen takes. And finally, we go up the exchange by taking on d1. So now we have a rook and a knight against a knight and a knight. So we know in this position that white can't take the pawn. So what does white do instead? He simply jumps over to d3 to defend his pawn. Now he's defending his pawn. What is the second move that black does to restrict the 2 pieces? He plays pawn to f6. Now black has this beautiful pawn structure against a bishop and a queen. And because of this pawn structure, they're able to have a very comfortable position. Their bishop is very active and can join in the fight. Both of their knights can join in the fight. And white's bishop is just kind of paralyzed. It's a wee bit useless. Eventually in this game, black plays his pawns up to stop the bishop getting active on this diagonal as well. And basically just makes this piece absolutely useless for the entirety of the game. Black went on to win this game. I'm not going to show you any more of it because I think you get the concept here. I don't want to just bore you with details of a game, a random game back in the day. But this whole idea of putting your pawns as black on e5 and f6 is a very, very good idea. And if you don't have middle game plans in your own games and you see there's a fianchettoed bishop against you, maybe this is a plan that you could go for. Let's jump into example 2. Example 2 is a game between Lisitsyn and Botvinnik. Botvinnik is one of my favorite chess players. I play the Caro-Kann, the Botvinnik Karl's defense variation. So Botvinnik really knows a thing or two about pawn structures. But in this game, white played the move knight to f3. Botvinnik played d5, controlling the center. White played b3. Black played c5. White fianchettoed his bishop on b2. And already there's a bishop that's fianchettoed against you. What do? Botvinnik plays the move f6. He wants to get this structure of pawns on f6 and e5 to make this bishop very useless. White plays the move e3, trying to maybe prepare d4 so that he can cancel out some pieces here in the middle and still have his bishop be a bit more useful. But here, Botvinnik just plays pawn to e5. And now white can't play a pawn into the center because it's simply just going to get captured. C takes d4, e takes d4, and here black can just go e4. And now this bishop is looking at a pawn, and this pawn can never move, and this pawn can never capture another pawn. And so this is stuck behind this wall. Instead of playing the move d4 that white wanted to play, he instead throws in a check, bishop b5. Here black blocks with the knight on c6, castle from white, and bishop d6 from black. The bishop is sitting here defending everything. This bishop's going to be useless. And if black wants to break out and make this bishop powerful, he can. White never has that opportunity. He just has to let black make all the decisions in the game. Really what white should have done, instead of playing bishop to b2 in this position, he should have played the move e3. And then going f6 doesn't make any sense because white can get in d4. d4, we have c takes d4, and we have e takes d4. And now the white bishop doesn't have to fianchetto here. He can stay on this diagonal, which maybe is going to be a bit more useful for him. Kind of like a Jabava bishop, where you attack the c7 square. A lot of the time in chess, we play against these weirdo hippo structures where they fianchetto both their bishops. And just understanding the idea of f6, e5 is going to be super helpful. Or if you're playing white, f3 and e4. Botvinnik went on to win this game about 35 moves later, where he was up 2 rooks to a rook and a bishop. But it all started from this solid understanding of how to make this bishop bad on b2. Let's jump into example 3. I'm going to quickly flick through the first 19 moves of the game, 38 technically because there's both sides moving, just to get to the position in the game that we're going to analyze and talk about. Sokolov played e4, Portisch responded with c5, the Sicilian's defense, knight c3, d6, d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight f6, knight c3, a6, bishop c4, looking at this weakness on f7, e6 to make this bishop a bad piece, looking into a pawn prism, white castles, black plays b5, attacking that bishop, forcing it to move, bishop to b3, still wanting to look over this side of the board, bishop e7, queen f3, queen c7, queen g3, knight c6, knight takes c6, queen takes c6, rook e1, centralizing a rook, black castles, bishop h6. This is a common tactic I always try to look for in my games. If black were to be stupid and push here, you could take the rook. But if there's ever a knight on f6, you can either put it on h5 or on e8 to defend the pawn. And that's what black does. He goes knight e8, rook a d1, centralizing the second rook, bishop b7, 2 pieces on a very powerful diagonal. Maybe you're already starting to see what white is going to play. First he plays a3, rook d8, rook d3. Now you're wondering, why is he not playing f3 yet? Because the pieces cannot take this pawn. You would be sacking a queen for a pawn, and you can't even win anything after that. You know, it's just not worth it yet. So white has time still to move his pieces around. King h8, getting it into the corner, doesn't want this pawn pinned anymore, and now he's threatening to take the bishop on h6. Bishop g5, bishop takes g5, queen takes g5, knight f6, queen d2, dropping all the way back, looking at this weak pawn, rook d7. And now we are at the position that this example is from. The computer says that the advantage is plus 0.2 for white, which basically means the position's completely equal. Nobody's winning this game yet. In these kinds of middle game positions where it seems very equal, the way to get an edge is to positionally beat your opponent. Or sacrifice materials and go for a checkmate. But I think if you can win by making slightly improving moves, and so that improving move that Sokolov went for was pawn to f3. Both of black's pieces are now completely immobilized looking at this pawn prism. They are never going to be powerful on this diagonal. The book says, with this move, white restricts both black's minor pieces and secures for himself an advantage which, though not a major one, is a lasting one. We'll skip ahead a few more moves. The rooks are doubled. The rooks are cheeseburger doubled here. The two bonds with the cheese in the middle. Queen checks. Queen to f2 to block the check. King g8. The knight drops back to e2. And here the queen goes to e5. The white queen then comes to d4. 3 pieces looking at this pawn and also offering a trade. A trade here would not be good because the knight can jump into the position. Instead of queen taking on d4, the queen goes to g5. a4's played. h5's played. The queen comes back to try to trade. The trade happens. Now b4 is played so that it's not captured. And a5's played so that there's no pawn protecting the b4 pawn. Also, there's a square here for a bishop to now get active and useful. The rooks can come back and target this. Now, this all seems great, like we're just going through a game, but you'll see this bishop is not very useful on this diagonal. I'm going to go through these next moves kind of quickly and show you that this bishop never has any home. It doesn't have any impact on this game, and the light squared bishop is able to get super active. So let's see. e5's played, c3's played, b takes c, knight takes c3, the king moves over to f8, the bishop starts moving onto c4, it's starting to get active, it's looking at this pawn. The rook comes over to attack this bishop, the bishop pulls back to f1, still eyeing this pawn. The king moves in, the knight moves over to a4, it's got a lovely outpost on b6 that maybe it wants to jump to. Rook c2, trying to go after this pawn, although it is defended. Rook b3, defending the pawn again, but also attacking this bishop. Is the bishop going to go back to a8? Well, if it does, they lose this pawn, so that's no good. Is the pawn going to come forwards? That would be a mistake too, because the knight can just block the defense of the rook, and the bishop is looking at a6. Here, maybe the bishop comes to b5, but then you can just take on b5 with the knight. The pawn takes, and now rook or bishop can take. Probably rook is better, and now you have 2 passed pawns. One of them's going to get promoted. Position's completely winning for Sokolov. c8 is equally as bad, but here Portisch moves his rook back to c7, the best move to defend his bishop. The knight reroutes over to c3, enemy knight goes to c7, and here you really see how bad the light squared bishop of blacks is. Beautiful move. Difficult one to spot. Bishop takes a6. 2 pieces attacking the b7 bishop. You might say, oh, what if we just take here? Well, if they were to take here, we have knight d5 check. Where's the king going? Best move is f8. And now we have knight takes c7 check, forking both of the pieces. King has to go to e7. And now you can win on a6. Just completely winning. So Portisch does not take this bishop because he's a smart player. He plays bishop to a8. And now the bishop just retreats to f1. And you've got 2 passed pawns. They are going to promote. And this bishop is completely useless because it can never get off of this diagonal, and it's always looking at some bad pawns. Maybe black needs to try to push and break up these pawns so that the bishop can become more powerful, but it's just very difficult to do that. And all the while, these pawns will be promoting, marching down the board to victory. The book says that white's initiative on the queen side has actually become very dangerous, and black is completely passive. They don't have any way to get anything going. And now let's jump into the final example, a game between Garry Kasparov and Viktor Korchnoi, 2 of the all-time greats in chess. This game was played in 1989. And I'm going to again just show you the opening moves so you can see how we get to the position that we're going to go over. It's a short one, but an exciting one. Big Gary Kasparov has the white pieces. If those of you who are new to chess or don't know, Kasparov is considered the greatest chess player of all time by a lot of people. Other people say Bobby Fischer, some people say Magnus Carlsen, but he's always one of those top 3 players. I think even Magnus Carlsen, who's the greatest player today and has had the highest chess rating ever, says Kasparov is better than him, which is interesting. Kasparov plays c4 and Big Victor responds with knight f6. The knight jumps to c3, c5, knight f3, d5, c takes d5, knight takes d5, e4, knight to b4, bishop b5 check, knight 8 to c6, not knight 4 to c6, d4, c takes d4. Instead of responding to that pawn attacking the knight on c3, he plays a3, kicking the knight, d takes c3, and here, instead of responding by taking the knight on b4, he takes the queen on d8, king takes d8. Now finally, he takes the knight back on b4, c takes b2, bishop takes b2, f6. And it's in this position where Gary is down a pawn. Gary's big brain probably started ticking here. I mean, it's already been ticking. He's got 100% accuracy so far in this game. And actually, chess.com rates this entire game as 100% accurate by white, which is amazing, especially when there was 23 moves. Why did black play the move f6? Well, he sees this bishop on b2, and he wants to put into practice the move that we've all been learning about. He wants to play e5 to make this bishop on b2 a useless piece. However, it is not black's turn. If it were black's turn in this position, then he could simply play e5 and have a very nice position. So what move does Big Gary play so that black cannot get this prism structure against his bishop? He pushes his pawn to e5, taking that square away from black. Now, black can't capture. If black were to capture here, white has 2 pieces attacking this pawn, so he could just recapture. If capture here, recapture, and white is completely dominant. He could even like castle in here and do some dirty work. I mean, it's just nuts. So black doesn't want to capture this pawn, but here, black plays the move bishop to g4. And you cannot make a mistake when playing against Gary, because he will play the top engine moves better than Stockfish does. White takes the knight on c6. Black takes the bishop on c6. And here, Gary sees that this pawn is isolated and all on its own, so he goes in for the attack. Black thinks, okay, now this pawn is not defended. I'm going to capture it, get another pawn. Now I'm up 2 pawns. Well, the knight moves in, checks the king. The king moves to c7. The pawn is recaptured and the knight is looking at the bishop on g4, so the bishop has to move back. Castle from white. The bishop moves all the way back to e8. And now is the end for Big Victor. Rook checks, king moves, knight moves to c4. The pawn comes to e5 because, yeah, even though it can be captured by 2 pieces, he needs to get activity for his bishops. The bishop takes. The pawn moves up to h5, trying to get some activity for this rook along the 6th rank. The knight jumps in and checks on h5, king b6, bishop c7, and the king goes to a6, looking very scared in the corner there. Knight c6, and black resigns. Now, I didn't really go over anything in that entire game. The only thing I'm really going over in this one is Gary knows what Big Victor's plan is, and he just stops that plan. And after he stops the plan, he's able to just completely dominate the game because black is squashed. He doesn't know what to do, and he starts making mistakes, and Gary plays like a robot. So if you've learned anything today from this video, just remember to play like a robot. But all jokes aside, I really do hope that this is helpful, that you can see these pawn structures on f6, e5, e4, and f3. Very helpful for controlling your opponent's bishops and can give you some really nice positions where things are just a lot simpler for you to play. I hope you're all able to put these principles into your chess games, and I will see you lads tomorrow where I'm going to be putting these principles into my chess games. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all very soon.